I was intrigued by this invitation, but it's only after the sessions last night and the sessions this morning that I realized how tremendously important what we're all doing here is. And so I'm very honored to be a part of it. I want to thank you all for your reports this morning and for giving us a sense of the state of affairs in different churches, in different countries. But I really want to thank you most deeply for your courage. The courage to go against the grain of your churches, of your denominations, to pursue the cause of truth. That's a very lonely and a holy path, and I commend you for it. Now, who am I and how did I get here? I come at this topic from a very different place from most of you, and I did not grow up in a setting that looks like this. I grew up in what might be thought of as the Jewish equivalent to a mainline denomination. I was also, don't tell people, once upon a time, I used to be very liberal politically. So what informs my comments here is, among other things, my own liberal past, both religiously and politically. Now, the second important thing that you need to know about me is that I'm a social scientist, and I see things through that lens. I'm interested in how processes are affected by people and affect people, how people affect and are affected by those processes. Now, the third useful bit of information you need about me is that I have no idea what qualifies this as a Jewish response, other than the fact that it is a response being given by a Jew, and a Jew who thinks a great deal about Jewish-Christian relations. Perhaps the most Jewish thing about this response will be its emphasis on tachlis, as we say in Yiddish, or the bottom line, brass tacks, if you will. In some ways, this response is the exact opposite of Rabbi Riskin's speech last night. I'm hopeful that it's a kind of opposite that complements rather than contradicts, because what I see here is a multi-headed challenge, and one that needs several very different tools aimed at its very different aspects. My general approach can be summed up like this. I think that it's a mistake to approach this issue primarily as a theological one. A little story. My own research, academic entirely, is on Christian Zionism and on evangelical Christian support for Israel. And several years ago in Toronto, I went to hear a well-regarded Christian Zionist pastor speak, and I brought my dad along. And I tell you this story as no disrespect to my father, but as an indication of something about a liberal religious identity. My dad is an exceptionally wonderful person. But as far as his relationship to Judaism, he's pretty normal. He has a very strong Jewish identity, but he's not very well Jewishly educated. Now, that preacher was fabulous, and he was going on. He spoke with great passion about his heart for Israel. And at one point, he started talking about the vision of the dry bones in Ezekiel. And my father leaned over to me, and he said, you know, he would do a lot better if he would stop quoting from the New Testament all the time. Now, I don't just mean this to be funny, but to underscore the fact that a lot of the people that we will be dealing with in mainline, if you like, Jewish denominations and mainline Christian and Protestant denominations are not really interested or well able in the nuanced discussions of biblical hermeneutics that we like to have. Israel, of course, is a thorny fact in Jewish-Christian relations. When we look at Israel, it's like Jews and Christians are watching different movies. Some of that, of course, is theological at base. But I believe that a theological approach is entirely the wrong one to get caught up in. When we talk about Israel, and of course about Jewish-Christian relations, it evokes questions of covenantal conditions, prophecy, millennialism, and that's a great fun conversation to have, don't get me wrong, but the crux of the matter, if you'll excuse the expression, is sociological. For some of us, it might indeed be about how we view the land or covenants or the divine plan, but it is a mistake to miss out on how it affects and is affected by how we view each other, Jews and Christians. This is a gathering of pastors and religious leaders. You are leaders and spokespeople in your churches, but we cannot forget the people in your pews. We cannot forget the younger generations. We cannot forget the average person. And while I might love the Bible and discussions about legitimate or illegitimate supersession hermeneutics, most normal people do not. One of our challenges is, I believe, that we need to find a way to teach pro-Israelism to liberal Christians or to young people for whom, because the Bible tells me so, is just not going to work. I think we do ourselves an immense disservice when we focus too hard on theological questions about this issue. It weakens our abilities to work together as Christians and Jews. It weakens your abilities to work together as Christians who might have different theological emphases. And it certainly weakens our abilities as Jews to work together. If the best argument we can make in support of Israel is that God promised us this land, then we've not thought hard enough. We might think that that's the best argument, but we'd better find other arguments that touch people who stand in different places in our churches and in our synagogues. By and large, liberal Christians are moved by issues of justice and ethics rather than theological issues. They tend not to care so much about Augustine or Origen, and they do care a great deal about fair play, about equality, about opportunities for everyone. If we keep expecting to build support for Israel through the Bible or theology only, we'll be speaking at cross purposes with the many, many Christians who might like the Bible for some things, but for whom it is not as authoritative as some of us might like. So here's a few things I would like to tell you that I think that you need to tell your churches, to communicate within your own denominations. First, we need to remind you as Jews, we need to remind you, to remind your churches, that delegitimation of Israel has serious repercussions for Jewish understandings of Christianity. It will come as no surprise to anyone here that the Jewish attitudes towards Christians are haunted by distrust and suspicion. And this is even truer in Israel, where most average Israelis have no contact with Christians or Christianity whatsoever. One of the tragic effects of this unbalanced and biased approach to Israel that we see among mainline Protestant denominations is the effects that it has on Jewish perceptions of Christians and Christianity. Those of us who are working to teach Jews in America and Israel to learn more about the New Testament, Christianity, and Jewish-Christian relations are often met with a deep reluctance to do so, for lots of reasons. There's an attitude of, why should I? What have Christians ever done for me except persecute my people, delegitimize my state? Christians and everything to do with them are written off as a hopeless cause. Now, we can debate until tomorrow whether anti-Israelism is really anti-Semitism or not, or when legitimate criticism flows into something more insidious and worthy of concern. But what must be understood and communicated is that Christian support for BDS is read by Jews all over the world as anti-Semitism, and that's for two obvious reasons. The first is that Israel is one of the few identity markers of contemporary Jewish life. Support for Israel is one of the key things that makes Jews feel Jewish. And of course, that doesn't mean supporting everything that Israel does, all of its policies or actions, but it does mean that Israel matters to Jews and is close to their hearts. Second, the burden of proof rests on Christians to demonstrate that the past is not the present, and that they can indeed interact with Jews in a new key. The burden rests on Christians to prove themselves trustworthy. Jews recognize that overt anti-Semitism is in decline, but we are, you'll forgive us, a little paranoid. We are a little traumatized, and we don't believe it. We see anti-Semitism is not disappearing, but is going underground. In the mainline Protestant delegitimation, we see the same old hatred expressed in a new way, where religion is ostensibly separated from politics, and a war on Israel is acceptable because it is only the latter, as in we love the Jews, but we hate Israel. And it is by no means understood as a coincidence by Jews that increasing mainline delegitimation of Israel comes at the same time as attacks on the basic rituals of Jewish life around the world, circumcision in particular most recently. Jews feel themselves to be under attack still by Christians and Christianity. They don't distinguish between active Christians and nominal Christians. It's all Christianity. We need to remind you, and you need to remind your churches, that delegitimation of Israel has serious repercussions for Jewish-Christian dialogue. I'm sure that there'll be people here who'll be familiar with Swidler's Decalogue of Dialogue. Maybe it's before everybody's time. It was first published in 1984. It offers some sensible ground rules that have helped to guide interfaith dialogue for more than 25 years. Now, the fifth commandment reminds us of something very basic, that each partner must define himself, and that conversely, our partners must be able to recognize themselves in our interpretations of them. For Jews, Israel is a critical part of who they are. It is simply impossible to dialogue without a recognition of how people see themselves. I can't imagine, lahavdil, if you will, I can't imagine Jewish-Christian dialogue succeeding with Jews delegitimating a Christian attachment to Jesus. I might not share that attachment, but I need to recognize and accept the attachments of others with whom I dialogue. To return to Swidler for a moment, his 8th commandment is that dialogue can only take place on the basis of mutual trust. Trust between Jews and Christians has been difficult to build and easy to break. And I don't really need to say anything much about the effect of this issue on dialogue in the aftermath of what was essentially a bait and switch when Christian leaders wrote that letter to Congress recently. We as Jews need to remind you, Christians, and you need to remind your churches that delegitimation of Israel has serious repercussions for the ability of Protestant denominations to serve, and I think, Andrew, this came from your paper, to serve as honest brokers for peace. These developments don't only mean that Protestants, mainline denominations, have lost their moral authority by only listening to one side and by falling in with a particular agenda. Support for BDS also means that Jews are not going to listen to Protestants. Support for BDS disables moderates and makes us moderates look like fools. Delegitimation of Israel taints everything, and that's a tremendous shame, and it does a terrible disservice to the cause of promoting peace. We cannot shy away from issues of injustice and oppression. Within Israeli society and outside of it, we need to be able to call something an injustice and to call an oppression, certainly. But we need to be able to do so fairly and truthfully. We cannot allow a shallow love for justice take the place of doing the difficult work of looking and listening carefully. As Alan reminded us last night from the Talmud, if someone found but did not toil, do not believe him. Liberation theology has been an immensely useful tool for shrinking denominations to find a relevant role for themselves and appeal to younger members. Those narratives, or packs of lies, if you will, have been tremendously successful because they appeal to the heart and they do not toil. We know that there is no justice without truth, and there is no truth without toil. No doubt we need to dismantle the lies, and we need to bring facts. That said, we also need to learn how to appeal to people's hearts. Why does Sabeel work? Why do people in the West gravitate toward that very pack of lies? We need to make the truth more compelling. People, Christians, need to come to Israel. They need to come and see my beautiful children and know that the wall is what keeps them safe. People need to come and meet the Arab Christian hospital director and hear him talk about his gratitude for the opportunities given to him as a minority in Israel. People need to come and see the Muslim women studying at Hebrew University or at Ariel. Our challenge is to make Israel, to make the truth, and our shared mandate to try to build the best Israel possible, to make it be an occasion for coming together and not for moving further apart. We need you to think about building new kinds of alliances, about building new kinds of Israel trips, and about building new kinds of emphases and language that allow us to meet people where they are and not just where we would like them to be.